definition will also be blurred, or more and more blurred, and become like just contemporary art. I don't know. Or what will happen? We will see. But it's in the city. Yeah.
But I mean, graffiti has been in the white cube since the 80s.
Yeah, it has. Yeah,
so for 40 years.
but it's still illegal. So that's it's as you mentioned also with the illegal part. I mean, it's not always illegal, but some. Yeah, the contemporary art is normally not illegal.
I mean, I think there are. I mean, you're all sort of kind of pointing at sort of various sort of angles, and I mean, we'll definitely get back to some of these. I mean, there's sort of legal aspects, legal ramifications that sometimes are sort of brought forth in relation to, for example, graffiti as a branch of urban art, the commodification of urban art. I mean, sort of commodification of that sort of aesthetic that you can find in advertising, for example, like a sort of visual language that can sort of be commodified. That sort of maybe also kind of brings forth as a dichotomy between authenticity and sort of like legitimized by like a larger context that sort of extends beyond just kind of the realm of urban art itself. But I think like Remy, you were also speaking about location. I mean, if we sort of depart from where we are, like in Stockholm, I mean, there are definitely other sort of European cities where the presence of certain kind of branches of urban art will be a lot more sort of omnipresent around you. For example, I mean, Stockholm, for example, I mean, I would say that it's not really the one city where you sort of walk around, sort of seeing, kind of, you're not struck by, say, graffiti, for example, or even sort of the prevalence of poster art. I mean, it's not really in your face. I mean, we have a sort of kind of cityscape that sort of almost feels sort of in conflict or sort of in contrast to that sort of branch of art. So I sort of wanted you guys to kind of elaborate a little bit on what are sort of biases or sort of attitudes historically that have existed around urban art that might have sort of impacted the presence of it. I mean, Remy, for you it will be difficult to sort of maybe elaborate on Stockholm or Sweden as a sort of geographical locale, but the rest of you, and then you can sort of give us your impression or sort of. Yeah.
I mean, Stockholm and Sweden has had very harsh rules and against graffiti and urban or street art. So I think that's very we can see that quite clearly in our cityscape.
Stockholm is very aesthetically controlled city, and we're talking about the central city. It's a capital, so there's it's very controlled in that sense that there's like one open wall in one part of the city, and that's about it when it comes to the central parts. But when I see Stockholm, I also see the broader Stockholm. I see the whole Stockholm as a city, and therefore I see that there is other things going on. What is the center and what is the outskirts? And I think things are changing because there is also criticism. That dialogue is not just happening here within the center of the city; it's happening across the city, I guess. And people are becoming more in charge of that. I think I see more throughout. I mean, I've lived here all my life, and I see more presence of that rebelliousness and that taking place and being more forceful than before. But when it comes to the central city, it's like it's untouchable. It's and I don't know if it's there's so many aspects to that. Why it is that way and why not, and the dialogue is not so present. It's maybe in the tube stations now and then, on the tube trains which travel at the max, but otherwise it's quite quickly rubbed off as well when something appears. When it comes to the spontaneous way of expressing.
Yeah, I was thinking about the relation with biases with the suburb and like urban art or graffiti and that. That is it really relate? I mean, that if you talk about the suburb, that it's more. Is it more prevalence or more visual in there than in the city? That you associate. I think is that true, or is it more like that you think that is a an image.
What is your
also-
experience? I mean, like, it's interesting that you mention it. I mean, it might be so that you always kind of like associate a certain kind of like urban outskirt area with a certain kind of expression and assume that it will be more present. But is that your sort of impression of? I mean, sort of when you actually are outside the
that's
city
what I
center?
would be like critical to that. Since I grew up in a suburb and I come from a suburb in Stockholm, that and so you work an expectation. So do you do graffiti or hip hop, or hip hop is part of hip hop culture? Then it's like, oh well, not really, but it's like this expectation on that it should be more present or more. But then of all the graffiti painters I know, they are from like the north and the more privileged part of the city. So it's interesting. So there are these white kids doing the graffiti from this, leading a tabby, so that's interesting. But I guess it's also you have to be in places that are not survived. I mean, övervakade. Surveilled. Thank you. And maybe the suburb is less surveilled than the inner city, or
I think there's also a difference between cities like Malmö. There's a complete difference to Stockholm. So it's also the idea of a city. But I work in Fittja a lot, and I've seen the changes also. I think there's more acceptance of having temporary walls. It's still control if we talk about graffiti, but then I see urban art as various aspects of expressions, within the public space. It's performance, it's so many things going on. And it's hard to define what's art within that as well, who has defined it, and if it's planned or it just appears from, some singers to, I see that as well as part of the urban art.
I mean, I would also, I mean, my own impression is that, I mean, over sort of fairly recent time, I mean, it's gone from like more like a zero tolerance kind of situation to a like more accepting. I mean, it's a conditional sort of acceptance. I mean, as you said, I mean, it's still controlled, but it's not so either or. Like, I think I also had to kind of pinpoint to myself, where do I actually find examples of this? I mean, yes, it's not only like the sort of, I mean, you have to kind of expand beyond like a city center. I mean, like a city is like every urban sort of area connected to it. I mean, beyond just like the heart of the city. But in the heart of the city, if you sort of look at it, I mean, I came to think of Kungsholmen, like Galleriet, which is like a very fancy kind of restaurant. You have like this big mural of an artist called Finsta. There's also like this kind of house front on Södermalm, for example, that I've seen being used for like advertising, like a big sort of Chanel, like a big sort of mural of like of the latest kind of Chanel fragrance. And it's I mean, there's something a bit symptomatic about it. Thinking of those two sort of sides. I mean, if that's the first thing that comes to mind, it says something maybe also about my own sort of gaze and where I sort of sometimes frequent. I mean, but it's telling somehow.
It's becoming more trendy, I think, and therefore, that's why advertisement is more interested in capturing that way of expressing. So I think that is also a trap in a sense, where to balance it, because it's when it becomes too trendy, it's also, a trend goes, it's out of dated as well. So that's a risk.
I think we're past the trendiness. Actually, I think it's already become passé. Because like street art has always had that relationship to the commercial world, and not only like being on the street, but it's always been like this dual role. So I think like even now it kind of feels dated in a lot of ways.
I mean, I would also, for sure, if you look at advertising, the sort of aesthetics of sort of, say, street art or graffiti, it will obviously be, very, I'm going to say appropriated, but it will be used. It's definitely, it has, for visual branding, it's just one expression that is very clear and something that can sell.
Exactly.
But is there a problem here in terms of authenticity and...
I had one thought. Because like both urban art and commercials have a message. So they meet each other in that sense too. So it becomes really easy to switch them about. So I think that well.
I can maybe give a concrete example. I was born and raised in, let's say, the Malmö of the Netherlands, so to say, compared to Stockholm then. And that is a city which suffered quite a lot from economical recess, closing of mining industry, etc. And right now the city is branding itself as the mural capital of Europe. So they have lots of murals for which they invite artists from all over the world. You actually can see more than 100 murals within the city center even. And from the beginning of this, let's say, this process of creating, well, street art and inviting professional artists, there was lots of resistance among, let's say, the local artists who already were tagging and were making graffiti long before others were invited and even paid for it. So I think we're talking about these two ways of dealing with, let's say, street art or urban art, which is the institutionalized way of related to branding, related to advertisement, maybe also, and also related to gentrification, I think. And there is maybe the bottom-up urge or need to raise a voice. And somehow I also feel this somehow a gap between these two. And I'm really much interested also in finding examples, maybe also in Stockholm, where these two come together. And of course, well, I'm here until Sunday, so please tell me where I should go. But I'm really much interested in, as I said, where they come together and where one maybe is being influenced by the other. Also the other way around, maybe reactions from artists on, let's say, the institutionalization of street art, urban art, graffiti, and how they deal with it.
I mean, I was also kind of thinking, I mean, we've already sort of kind of touched a little bit on it. I mean, Alida, you were kind of saying that, or kind of stressing that, I mean, urban art, it's been sort of, you know, it has its standing and it's had for a long time and it's seated in a sort of broader sort of contemporary art realm. And I was kind of thinking, well, on the one hand, yes, I mean, the question I had in mind was like, is urban art sort of seated in a sort of mainstream art realm, or is the sort of is the urban artist more of a sort of outside artist kind of situation? And in my mind, it's kind of both. I mean, like you will have, and Paula, you were kind of saying, I mean, it's a number of sort of art. I mean, I can't actually really think of even 10, I mean, artists that really are front runners of urban art here. I mean, I think of Nug, for example. I mean, Nug, I think his name is Martin Gustafsson. He studied Konstfack. He did this art project called Territorial Pissing, which was a video work of like a public sort of metro train sort of being tagged. And that was like very sensational. I mean, it was a huge sensation. I mean, it was like and I think people still remember that. I mean, the effect of that having been launched into like a sort of news realm, I mean, I think that still it lingers on today, and that obviously, you know, comes with sort of legal aspects of, you know, is it public damage, is it art, or where do you draw the line? I mean, whose prerogative is it, and so on. But still, I mean, like, for me, I mean, of course, you will find examples. I mean, institutions doing exhibitions on this theme, for example. I mean, there will be few artists that will be represented in a sort of typical gallery room situation. But what is the reality? I mean, like, is it still like, is it kind of quoted, or is it like a quota, or do you actually?
I think like there are a lot of painters that you know are like graffiti writers from the start, but then, I mean, they might not have that expression like in their current art.
I was thinking of I mean, the political part of using public space in that urban art becomes political, whether the artist means it or normal. It's more common or much that the urban art is using expressing some political point but this territorial pissing, I don't think he was political, but it kind of becomes something like anarchy or something when you do that, because and it's seen, and the cultural minister was like, this is not art, and that is, there was the debate after that is still, but so that's what was my point. Sorry, now I lost, but I think that the political part, and with sorry, now I missed my point.
No,
but
I think I was kind of curious. I mean, again, about the perception. I mean, sometimes, I mean, immediately you think things are in a certain kind of way, and then when you probe yourself, you're like, but is it really? Is that like a perception I have that, in 2021, urban art is so well seated, or is it like a quota situation of every other institution?
Yeah, now I know what I was saying.
Like doing an exhibition every 3 years.
The urban art comes from this. It's like more like autodidact, or like young people just doing stuff on the street, in contrast to like contemporary art or public art that is like a rigid system of who puts the sculpture that is put there on the square is like a rigid process. So that is interesting, that it is a brand urban art. It comes from that it doesn't really relate to the school. It doesn't have this relation that is, for example, like institutional critique or this stuff that you do. You are that the contemporary art is busy with, like criticizing its own context. So that is interesting with urban art, that it kind of comes from the people and the artists and the makers, and more common with autodidact artists, for example, and that kind of.
I also think there's a gender question here. You know, when it comes to graffiti, it's mostly 99% boys, but also from which class they belong. And I think it's about taking the risks. Who can allow yourself to take that risk and becoming, a criminal? I think those things are quite. For me, I'm schooled and everything as a visual artist. Why I happen to work with public art is just to make it visible, basically. So I don't come from that school. I don't know what kind of rules I'm breaking or not breaking when I'm using the spray can. But there's an aspect of, the gender, the femininization of this field as well. That's something new, I think, which is happening, because it's all mostly what I see is that I hear from guys that this should be done and this shouldn't be done. For instance, if I use stencil, that's not so cool because you have to do it, those things. And there's another school to that. Yeah, you have to be authentic. And I'm like, what is authentic? And that comes from that schooled, critical thinking of, twisting everything. But there's an aspect of, who is doing it and why, and who can afford to do it legally or illegally. I've never done any project which is illegal, for instance.
Like I was also, Stockholm is a very distinct kind of city. Even if you compare it to sort of other European cities, it's extremely put together. That's one thing. We barely have social housing left anymore, for example. I sometimes think of Vienna, which is a city I've visited a lot, where in every sort of district you have like social housing. So, you'll kind of, refrain from a super like class divide situation in the city center, which you obviously see here. But Stockholm being so like segregated, and on some surface, we sort of pretend, we're sort of colorblind, but really, it's so segregated between the city center and the sort of outskirt kind of suburban, urban sort of areas that are sort of connected to the city by outskirts. And wouldn't that sort of kind of entail somehow like that the sort of relevance for urban art would be quite great in a city like Stockholm, where the art can kind of sort of be used to reflect on realities and sort of kind of just be sort of, to distribute information? Shouldn't we sort of need more urban art here in Stockholm, in a city like this?
We need more art, and back to what is urban, I think it's about visibility. And because people might not, from class aspect, not be used to going to this institution to take, to see art. So the public space becomes quite important in that interaction with art in everyday life. You just, happen to see it. So I think we need more art, no matter what kind of art it is. It could be, of course, I think we can all agree that we need more art. And also the question of, is it contemporary, is it urban, and sometimes we just have to let go of that, that overflowing, we can't distinct. We want to place things into different categories. Maybe we're beyond that now, I think.
I think in a sort of, in a situation or sort of era of sort of global climate crisis, for example, which is obviously like a big interest that has to sort of be addressed. How does this find itself in urban art? Do you kind of see like an overlap between sort of the urban interest and sort of the interest that sort of relate to like a future sustainability situation? Is there a conflict between these interests?
I think there is the overlap with, for example, there are a lot like Extinction Rebellion working with like performance and happenings and video art and all these methods from the art world, but still having this message, political message of. So a lot of I don't know, Greenpeace. Could you call that like happenings or performances that they did? Maybe not, but I think Extinction Rebellion. Not, but at least Extinction Rebellion work like I was like there must and a lot of artists also involved in those the actions that they do. So I think isn't that? But the thing with the sustainable part is urban art is quite immaterial. I mean the murals and it's not an object normally, right? Urban art, the public art is these objects, but the urban art is like so that is like really sustainable, right? That it's. Immaterial, it's a more an image. You use the buildings that are already there. But I was thinking, even though we are talking about Stockholm, I mean, other city. I relate to Santiago, where my parents come from, and now with this, all the political things happening there. I mean, the people use the urban art a lot to say a message to a lot of political messages out in the urban art. So that is like very vivid. Or I don't know, even Berlin I think is more. But here in Stockholm is a bit more less. But still, just saying something on the wall, putting a text there, saying I'm here, or I was here, is like kind of also like stating I exist, I'm here. It's like maybe. That urban art can articulate something that is hidden or that is not visual or excluded.
But maybe it's also because we use social media for that, like using that space, like the digital space, as a room to utter our opinions instead of the streets.
Yeah.
I mean,
maybe because it's cold here.
It's also cold here.
I mean, I was also kind of thinking about. I mean, you mentioned public art. I mean, also sort of the sort of ideology behind sort of kind of revitalizing sort of suburban areas and bringing art outside of city centers and sort of letting art find itself, far out in cities in sort of outskirt areas. And I mean, you will have like institutions for that. You will have the Public Art Council doing that. You will have like a body like Stockholm Konst doing that.
Each municipality.
And municipality will also do that. But I mean, I was thinking, have you seen issues relating to this where, like the sort of question of sort of by whom and for whom? I mean, I will assume, Saadia, you probably will have done sort of public commissions, for example. Paula, you might possibly as well.
Yeah.
But have you sort of thought about it? Like, I mean, who decides and for whom, and are there sort of problems to address that sort of lies within there?
Definitely. I mean, whether it's commissioned or you create a project yourself, when it comes to public space, you have to create relevance. You have to study the place. You have to, of course, you have to have a dialogue because it can't be hit and run all the time. It can't be a spaceship which lands and it once again very strange what art is and the gap is widened once again. So I think. Whenever I work, even if I don't live in that city, is a research-based process to be able to also navigate, but also then look upon who can I co-create with, because my processes are very much co-creation. So I never say I will work with everyone because everyone means no one. So you have to actually address and also translate what everyone means in this project.
But is it a reality though? Is it this creating relevance by incorporating like a community, for example, and distributing it within like the sort of local vicinity and just not sort of sitting somewhere on a sort of, storyboard situation and then sort of just executing without, but is that a reality? Do you think that's the way it looks?
It definitely is, and a lot of municipalities work actively with that kind of bureaucracy. That it's on one hand politicians, then it's the people who live there, and you always work with different types of citizen boards when you make a public art piece.
because we're dealing with, you know, our tax money, you know. So there is a responsibility connected to that as well. You have to be accountable for what you're doing, and there has to be transparency. So I think that relevance comes from the project itself, and I think that's how I work. But there's so many ways and methods of artists working. Sometimes it's, you know, hardcore. Basically, they're working with you with paint, and other parts they're just coming with ideas and inspiration, because everything is about establishing what's going to happen in this public space. So it's kind of informing them as well, and establishing that this is happening. And sometimes it's through these workshops and co-creation that you create ambassadors who can tell the rest, okay, I was with this project and this wasn't just, you know, there was a relevance to it. I think that's one way of, you might not reach everyone, but you can reach a few who can be some kind of ambassadors in that space. I think, yeah.
I mean, Remy, like, I'm gonna ask you, for example, I mean, like, your experiences, I mean, will it sort of parallel, I mean, what sort of Alida and Saadia has been kind of saying, I mean, this kind of creating relevance by also sort of involving. I mean, for me, it's also, I mean, there's also like the Swedish way of things. I mean, where we always involve. I mean, like various bodies need to sort of have had a say before like a final decision is made and executed. And it's very seated in like a Swedish way of things. And this is not really how things look everywhere. But is that your experience as well?
It certainly is. I think it's not only Swedish. We experience more or less the same in the Netherlands, where also, well, not only in art processes, but also in urban planning processes, for example, where you as a planner or a designer, you actually need to involve citizens, which sometimes for most of the architects or urban planners is a hard process, because they have the feeling they are opening up their process, which is theirs, and they're talking to people who are not experts on it. So it really leads to difficult situations. For that reason, we with Deer Hunter, we try to reverse this process. So we as designers, we participate in daily life. So in that way, we also co-create, not by asking the inhabitants to participate in the design process, but we participate in their daily life.
Yeah.
And from that we learn. And then, you know, in the end, we show them, hey, this is what we learned from you. Do you agree? Can you recognize things? And I'm also wondering then, again, in relation to urban art or street art, I think it's beautiful, the process, how you describe it yourself. I think that definitely is not the only way, or I think there are lots of other artists that work completely on the opposite way. I also don't have a clear idea or answer, you know, there's no good or bad in this. And sometimes I think in preparing this talk, I had a couple of minutes, I was also thinking about, well, if there is not a process like you described beforehand or in the execution of a project, then it can only be a coincidence if some work succeeds, whether how you define a success, of course, that also depends on your criteria of this. So I kind of agree with this, and indeed I think we're also in a societal waves where I think we see a lot of what happened in the 60s and the 70s, we see back right now, you know, the urge for climate change, people standing up for that with the marches all over the world. But also regarding to art and urban planning and architecture, the need to involve people, or the other way around, of course, to learn from inhabitants' needs, and in order to design something that really suits some needs or some societal issues.
I was thinking, I mean, Saadia, you've done quite a lot of sort of big collective sort of murals, I mean, involving a lot of people. I mean, like large-scale projects with even like several sort of different groups kind of participating in the sort of process where they're part of the co-creation, and you're like the artistic director of like a vision, and then it's executed together with many people. And I know you've also kind of described it, I mean, the collective mural as like a force for social change. So I sort of wanted to kind of bring that up and just let you elaborate on that sort of collective process.
I have to say change is a quite big word. I agree, because but what I feel when I work, I actually design a process. I actually want to also make art process more accessible, that it's not rocket science, you know. It's about also engaging people into the process of thinking and, you know, coming into a space where everything is allowed, allowing space basically. So in that sense, when it comes to the social change, it's about, you know, impacting your own space. And being part of it, it's about feeling at home as well. When it comes to your neighborhood, you're being. I'm not, you know, creating jobs for people because I work a lot with socioeconomic, you know, quite challenging places. But what I aim to do is, you know, create kind of a visual change, because all the other changes are so slow as well as life is. So there's something with that. When I have a group, everyone says, I can't paint, I can't draw, I'm not good at it. There's a notion of what art is, which is connected to skills. And I want to talk about ideas and thoughts and stories, and you're expert in your own stories and your own neighborhood. So of course you will have the best, you know, saying about this. When it comes to techniques, I've studied, I will figure it out. So I think that is the role I play, but also the social change become like something which I've experienced, that they say no when we stand on the inauguration. They're like, oh shit, we did it, you know. And that moment is something that you realize that you could do something, and I think it's a symbolic change to say, and it creates some kind of that's what art is for as well. You know, it's you have to be realistic with what kind of goal you set up for yourself as well. And when it comes to different groups, I try to, you know, locate and see, okay, how can I, because I want to maximize everything. I think it comes from my upbringing of sharing everything, you know. You have to be collective. If you think about yourself, you're being selfish, you know. It's that individual thinking is like harmful. So I come from that collective thinking, which is like, I have this responsibility as well to see how wide can this process be, to create, you know, their spokesperson. Every group is like, okay, they're women, they're children, they're old people. They're just spokesperson for that group. That's not, but they're still individuals. It's not that they represent whole that group. So, you know, it's always a tailored process. I have a method and I have experience which I can be, which allows me to be secure and, you know, have some confidence, but otherwise I'm as curious as they are into this process.
I mean, I think of like a time of a lot of sort of political turbulence. You have like far right wing sort of, you know, forces seating themselves a lot more sort of in the sort of mainstream and a sort of like a public sort of realm situation. I mean, in my mind, I mean, also because certain kind of branches of urban art has, I guess, historically also been like an act of rebellion, where you kind of appropriate public space to kind of bring forth a message. You sort of you claim that space and you bring forth a message and you make it known by sort of claiming that space. I mean, in my mind, I'm thinking like, shouldn't we see like a lot more sort of poster art, for example, like statement-based art? I mean, plastering. Like, I'm not really feeling that we are seeing it, but on some level, it would make sense to have it, you know, have these statement-oriented sort of art sort of being brought forth a lot more. And
Isn't the digital platforms, you know, our social medias, and those are poster venues as well?
Yeah.
But I think like I mean, I've done a few poster projects with contemporary artists, but like I think when you do it at the scale that we do it on, it's on such a small scale. So even if we would do an impact on a city, it would be a small impact. And with all posters, they get postered over with other posters. So it's always like really, really temporary. So I think like it exists, but it's always like in a smaller scale.
I think poetry. I mean, I've seen poetry, spoken word becoming. I mean, it's not just the written words; it's actually expressing, and that I see expanding and growing a lot as a new way, actually, as a tool.
I think it's also important, as you were saying, I mean, like a distribution channel is also like mediated to the platforms. It's not really only like the physical realm and physical kind of spaces. I mean, social media is such a big sort of part of our everyday lives, and we receive so much information and so much flux of imagery through those sort of channels. In a way, there's also like a mediation that also probably needs to be addressed beyond just physical kind of space and a realm.
I mean, they're both public spaces.
Yeah. I mean, Alida, you work also with a platform called Art Platform, and I was kind of wondering, like, what sort of projects is Art Platform developing currently that intersects with urban art?
I was thinking about that because I haven't really worked with any urban art projects, but I'm working at a project right now with an artist group called Coyote, and because like for me, urban art starts from below. Like the projects I worked with are like from a municipality or like a region, so it comes from the other side. But this project is at Slussen. It's encompassing project from January until April, I think, or March, and will consist of happenings and like film screenings and also like physical work in a part of Slussen. And it's a way of like both working with the different agents that work and live at this area, which is under development, and also like making it a lively place again. So it will be assigned. The project is called Hometown, and will consist of both larger performance at the end of it, but also exhibition at the bar Blå Dörren, and then a film screening at Hilton, and also a printed newspaper, which will be in a kind of case as Metro, the newspaper that existed a couple of years ago. So it will be distributed to people just walking by. So it's a way for like Stockholm to try to not see Slussen as a dead space for this time being until it's finished. And I think it's a really beautiful initiative from Stockholm Stad to like try to integrate people into the process of building Slussen.
I mean, I think we also kind of need a word on the sort of collective that Paula, you're part of, Mapping Down Just City. It's like an artist collective of sort of practitioners from various sort of artistic disciplines, and you each represent like a discipline each, I think. And I mean, it's a very sort of interesting sort of collective. I mean, you sort of explore kind of civil rights in relationship to like the city and who has agency, who bears agency, and sort of who. I mean, the question you sort of work around is who actually owns the city. If you kind of probe the structures and sort of relationships, and also kind of involuntary homelessness is like one notion that you sort of actively kind of work around. What were sort of the rationales of kind of joining forces this way from different sort of disciplines?
Yeah, we actually studied together, so that's how we met. We studied at this at Mejanark. It was called. I think it had changed name, so a postmaster course. So we came from different disciplines, but that's the interesting thing that for me, coming from the visual arts and studied the fine arts at Konstfack, is like now we are working in another field because we come from graphic design, and most of in the group have like activist backgrounds, or also like these parts that are not even for art, like bostadsvård, more political context, and like occupation of Högdalen, the school in Högdalen, and and all these. So with Mapping the Unjust City, I mean, I think certainly in the urban art area or context, but and also with this activist and the occupations. But what happens with I think you were also mentioning about what that we are also have this political. That we have a message. We want to question who is owning our cities, to raise awareness, and for people, because we are all citizens and we pay tax. So with this shift in ownership, that our squares and that is what we were mapping, the squares in the subway lines of Stockholm, that they have been privatized, and whether they are private or public, and in how extent they are private and public. There is scope there, which we show in our map. And we use also the lines of the metro because it's familiar, so you immediately know with the place, and you travel from there to there. But it's not common knowledge of who owns it. And sharing this knowledge is the pedagogical part, as you mentioned. Sharing this knowledge is like to raise awareness, and so our main goal is to for people to okay, do we want this or not, and to take action and somehow to do something. We can to organize, and also to connect people from the north part of the city in the south part of the city, that they see they're the same owners that they're struggling with. And one example of that it actually makes people do stuff is that there was this group, Allt åt alla, Everything for Everyone in Gothenburg, who saw our map, and then they made a map in Gothenburg with tram lines, also with ownership, and they focused more on housing and the raise of the rents. But they said that they saw our map, and then they made their own Gothenburg map. So I think we also use it feels simple and easy, and that is a part of why people feel that they want to join or do. Yeah.
I mean, on that note, I mean, I have sort of given some thought to the necessity of using a certain kind of form, because mapping the sort of unjust city, an objective for you is to share information and to kind of make it accessible, and you can do that in various ways. You can do it through a video essay. You can do it the way you've chosen to do, find an image that is instantly recognizable, like the map, the city of Stockholm through its maps as a metro underground situation, and then you sort of place information along this, and I think it's very relatable. You instantly are drawn in, you know it, and it engages you, as opposed to if you do a 45-minute long sort of essay video, and the question is who will actually sort of be recipient of that. So I was thinking when there is a message, how, and you must have in your collective reasoned quite a lot around form, and what form is effective in relation to objective that you want to reach. And the map it's a super good example of how to really sort of make something very concrete and instantly sort of latching onto your sort of memory and mind.
Yeah. Well, I think comparing the map of Stockholm, where you have the real map with the geographic, the suburb map is still simplified map. So that was a choice to use that map instead, and also. There you have the whole city, but there's of course parts that are not in the suburb subway lines, but it's almost the whole, and we also needed to narrow down because it's so time consuming to find all this information, even though it's accessible for anyone. You have it on the line on the internet. It is really open for everyone to, if you just do it. Just that it takes a lot of time, so that's why we have made it on on a website actually, where you can see the in time the history, when it was sold and to whom, and all this, because when it's only an image, you can only show how it is today, right? But then while we have been showing it, we had it at Arkdes in an exhibition. It was 6 months, and during this period there was one square that was sold. So it's also, how do you, this happens all the time, and sometimes 10 city centers can be sold in one to one owner, So on the website you can have this that is shifted. It's more that you can update it easily, and you can see the history, you can click who was on the 70s, 80s, 90s, and the different decades. So you see the layers of information, and we have also broadened it to more subjective stories, an anthropologist that is part of the group now, describing the places so you have the data of the owners, and then what do you see when you are there, and how is this place, because you don't really see that on the map, right? The map is just the subway map still, so still the image is this subway map.
I would say in both of your cases, Saadia and Paula, also with the collective, I would think, what you're doing, it really sort of raises a lot of questions. And do you feel I mean, if I were you, I would feel like I'm really doing something that is, you know, thought-provoking here, something that could send good signals and so send messages and also inspire other people to kind of, you know, follow in my lead and do, as you were saying. I mean, you did it here, then those initiatives sort of, you know, that derived from yours in Gothenburg, for example. Like, do you feel like you've been sort of has sort of traditional art media, for example, and media beyond just like art coverage, has it been responsive and to kind of your practices? Do you feel like media has been with you in terms of kind of giving you room to speak about this?
I think when it comes to my practice, what I do is try to create a presence of something which is absent. So that is what I do, and because it's connected to question of justice within art scene, and also what is art, what is relevant, and sometimes we just create things for our own people, for our own platform, and for our own friends in a way, and we talk a certain language which no one understands either. So I think when I try to work, it's about people who see art as a luxury as well. And it's about class and creativity. So in that sense, when we see the class differences increasing in Sweden, and I'm talking about these areas and working with these people, it's media can't avoid, because no one in Sweden wants to be a bad person. So there's also a hijacking situation, which I'm quite aware of, that how can you create a bigger discourse by working with this group and talk about a larger...
Do you feel, I'm sorry to interrupt you,
No.
do you feel like you're in control of your own narrative? I mean, because what you're describing is this
No.
situation where somebody else has a narrative that they want to apply onto your practice,
Yeah.
and just like check off like a list situation. But can you be in control of your own narrative?
For me, I think it's about awareness again. It's about awareness and also creating diverse stories from certain areas. For instance, when I talk about Fittja, there's an idea about Fittja, what's happening. It's a dangerous place. It's about drug dealing and shooting. But that's just 1%, and it's quite complex. And I think that complexity is no one is really have the courage or force to be able to understand that. Everyone wants to just simplify things, and that's what media comes in. They want to simplify things and talk about my work as good art. I'm a good artist, and I'm actually I don't want to fall into that either. It's about talking to those people and working with them in a way which makes art accessible to them and being true to that. And in that sense, I also see that in a bigger field, when it comes to art field, I'm talking about the absence and presence, about stories. So it's not about the result either, how it looks like, how art from like multicultural areas can look like. It's colorful, and they're always trying to simplify you and put you into, and also minimize you in that sense. But what I'm trying to do is humanizing people who've been not seen as numbers and dangerous, and just as a troublemakers in many senses.
I mean, I'm thinking it's a dual in that sense. On the one hand, I mean, getting a media gaze on what you do, I mean, it spreads the word. I mean, it creates visibility for a project. I mean, it will connect sort of what you do to audiences by exposure. So it's in a sense it's good, but it also comes with that reductive situation of like minimizing it and sort of pinpointing it down to what it needs to be for your readers, or for
like a social project. Social projects are good projects. They're not real art, and they're not contemporary art. And I think what is contemporary art, it's actually a dialogue with the contemporary world we're living in. And these are the questions we're addressing right now. Those are the questions which are really important to talk about and engage, and not just addressing that there is a difference, but also talking about that maybe the battery is run out, talking too much. I mean, as an artist, what you do is you actually see and you question and you see things. And I'm not just seeing things, I'm actually doing something with the question I raise. I'm actually also trying to engage people into that work. But there was one incident, for instance, in Fittja, there were 3 guys, there were a portrait of them, and they were killed in different criminal activities. And there was a mural by them, and there was so many discussions that they should be allowed or not allowed. And I think we have to see that people, we are human beings, you know, we're not just what we do, we're also someone's son and brother and so on. So also the right to be grieved. And so they wanted to use my project, which was next. I worked with mothers after that. And they wanted to make me as a good artist in compared to that bad art. And that I didn't want to play along. So you have to be aware of what kind of agenda you have and how you can hijack situations to create more space for people. Because I know I've studied and I have access and I have some kind of power. So that's what I use, basically, to also bring in more voices into it. But it's not always easy, you know.
Because Paula, I was thinking, I mean, what you do with mapping the unjust city, I mean, in a way, you're doing a certain kind of job through art that you could, you know, almost sort of expect other people to do. I mean, like to have like investigation journalism kind of doing what you do. Now you do it through art, but don't you? I mean, could you feel that the collective could make use of like a media sort of being on board and taking on what you've sort of presented through the art and then distributing it?
I guess if we had more media exposure, we could use that in a sense. I mean, now we are at an exhibition in Tensta, and Tensta Konsthall, and a group exhibition where I was a little bit annoyed that all media that were there just only focused on the map. There was a map and there was also like an object. And for me, the art was like, there is this map and there is this object. And both of them are the art piece. It's like having a painting of 2 meters and then filming only 1 meter. But that's how media works. It's always like, okay, so here is this and this is the map. And then we only show this because it has to be fast. I'm always irritated of this, and I mean, normally with media, that it's so simplified. Nothing can be allowed to be complex. And now I'm having a solo exhibition in Skärholmen at a Folks art gallery there, which is quite newly started. And then I talked like 2 hours with this journalist from the local press. And I talk about a lot of stuff, but then the focus is like, it's an exhibition, it's a solo exhibition, I'm returning home, but still the focus is not on the art. It's like that I grew up there and what I feel or don't feel. And of course, we talked about that in like, but it's like enlarged. So actually, they put a title on the net, on the internet website, and I was calling them. You have to change this title because it's so negative, because that is not what but they actually listened, so I made them change at least the title of I mean, still the text was really good, but the title, the person putting the headlines, they are looking for sensational stuff, so they even made up a word that don't exist. Now we're talking in English, so I will not repeat it, but so it's you just look for clicks and something sensational, and that's what it's so annoying with I guess also with your projects as well, like putting this
I think you have to be pedagogical, you have to be a teacher, you have to be, you know, all those things to try to educate people into that complexity you're trying to portray. For instance, when I work, there's always a title about colorfulness, and I'm talking about visibility, that I want to work with color that no one gets away without seeing it. You can't say that I didn't see it. And, you know, there's a lot more to color than just being colorful, you know, why? So there's always a tendency, and I think journalists, they have 2 minutes, they have 1 minute, they have like, they talk to you for 1 hour, but then they have to put it in 50 words, I don't know what. So there are limitations, but it's important to take part in that, because I see when I work with people and they see their project be part of the media, they grow and they feel proud. So sometimes it's you have to, you know, just give space to their voices, that it's happening in their neighborhood and the newspaper and to be printed. That's not something which happens every day.
I mean, I tend to think myself about, I mean, like 100% situation would be ideal. You're never at 100. I mean, 70 is better than 30, 50 is better than 30. And that's how I reason myself, like rationalize. I'm thinking, yes, I mean, I have my narrative, I have an agenda. I hope that it will sort of be covered accordingly. It's most likely not. I mean, somebody else will kind of reductively sort of make it into their agenda, but hopefully you arrive at 70, and then quite a lot have been won anyway. And I think it's like, I mean, that's a reality you have to kind of wrestle with. I mean, like, you give some, you take some. Yeah. You can always complain. Yeah.
In relation to this, I had a question. I think Paula was there. Because I'm triggered by the project you described from, let's call it the subway map, which in my opinion sounds really fascinating. And I wonder, because you're talking about it still as an art project, which is represented in a museum right now, where for you exactly is, let's say, the art within the project? Because to me it sounds like a lot, maybe also as art, but what is the piece where you think, okay, this is the artistic piece, and there I want to be in total control, for example, how it's covered in the media?
Yeah, well, it's that it is based on image. That's why, and that we are all from different field. I mean, the graphic design and art and aesthetics and this from this contemporary art field, right? So that's where we mainly work, but we've also been in the political like activist context, I guess. So but with the image, there is a saying in Swedish, like one image says more than 1,000 words. You know, you see, you understand, and then because you understand a lot just from this image. But it's basically like research made in one image. So we made a lot of effort to make that image tell, you know.
Exactly. That is also what I mean. Like, I think it's the method, how you retrieve this information, and maybe also emphasizing on the fact that this information should be publicly accessible, for example. And then in the end, I would even dare to say it's a pity that it's being reduced to an image, because the method, in my opinion, is as much as an art project that deserves, let's say, freedom and also space than the image in the end.
Yeah, thank you. I was also thinking, I mean, I think your work is also, I wonder how you work with images, because you do this mapping and working with the communities and all this information, and then you cartopology, you said. So I think we have a lot in common, the practices, but how do you work with images as well? Or,
I'm just going to say we're running out of time, so we have to be quite quick. But Remy, like you'll have the last word to kind of round up the conversation. So you have like 45 seconds.
Try to keep it short, so you can round up. Our map is never the end project. It's actually, we start with mapping from the first day we are on site. So we start literally at a blank canvas, and the process of discovering a neighborhood and talking to people forms the map. And in the end, let's say the map that we show, and that is the result, is the same thing, the same document as the thing we started with. So there are errors on it, there are corrections on it, etc. But these were apparently important within the process of getting to know this neighborhood. So this is how we do it, and that is also the reason why the map is crafted, let's say, literally with pen on paper, pencil, so that you see this process and that also the inhabitants can see the map grow and develop, and they can point us towards, for example, blank spots. Hey, you haven't been there, I'm living there, you should visit it. So in that way, the map is the basis for the dialogue also.
I think we'll close there. I mean, there were many ways this conversation could have taken form. I mean, I feel like it was a very dense conversation. I mean, I think we got into sort of a lot over the course of an hour. But thank you for participating, and it was really interesting sort of hearing what you had to say.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Nice.